microphone to Andrea Adelson, who's standing at the back of the room. She's from ESPN. She's also my neighbor. I pulled out all the stops for this week's show. Andrea covers everything. She covers the ACC. You see her on ACC Network. You hear her on the radio. You've read her for like, how many years have you been at ESPN now?
Since 2010.
Since 2010. So that's
why I said 2010.
Yeah.
Didn't want to add.
Well, there's actually in the back behind in my Zoom background in my office, there's a printout of the first Sentinel sports section front page that I ever had a story on when I was like 18. And I remember, and Andrea has a column because she was much more important. Mine was just a little thing. But there's a column from Andrea going down the side. So I always like think fondly of our time at Sentinel, and I appreciate your Orlando roots and that you still stay, plugged into local things like this and what's going on in the state of Florida. Kenny, you heard him talking about Florida State. Anything you want to add about Seminoles or your expectations for how the rest of the season will go?
Well, I've spent a lot of time with Florida State over the last 3 years. That's probably the team I've been around the most as we have watched what has happened from Jimbo to Willie Taggart and now Mike Norvell. And I just echo what Kenny said about Mike Norvell, the passion, the energy that he brings every single day. One of the things that players continue to reiterate is no matter what is happening, wins, losses, he's the same guy every day. And they really appreciate that about him, that there isn't highs and lows with him. He's always the same. And he had a lot of work to do when he got to Florida State. He basically had to completely turn over the locker room and change the culture in that program. And now what we're seeing and why I think they're so successful is because they have players who are working hard and who believe in what Mike Norvell and that coaching staff are telling them. They had a rough stretch, lost 3 in a row. And I think maybe some people were wondering, are we going to see the same Florida State that kind of quits on the season? But absolutely not. They've been dominant. Everyone saw that against Miami. Everyone saw that against Syracuse. Terrific rushing game. And I think they have a chance at 10 wins this year. When before the season started, everyone was wondering, is Mike Norvell on the hot seat? To go from those questions about that program to potentially 10 wins, I think just speaks to what Mike Norvell and those players have done to completely transform that program from meh to, wow, they're pretty good again.
You mentioned Miami, obviously. I'm not trying to rub it in on Miami fans. I just, Anyway, you've got a story. I think word on the streets, you've got a story coming out this week about Miami. Any insight on what that story sounds like?
Well, a lot of people thought Miami was going to be really good this year, picked to win the Coastal Division. I was not as high on Miami because I thought that Mario Cristobal was going to have a lot of work ahead of him to do. And I think that's played out this season. Probably worse than a lot of people expected with some of the performances, losing to Duke at home, losing to Middle Tennessee at home, and getting blown out by Florida State. I think just exposed a lot of the issues that the program has internally in terms of the locker room, the work ethic, the talent. But I sat down with Mario Cristobal for about 45 minutes last week, and he's adamant that he's the guy to get it fixed, and he's not going to stop until they get it done. And that starts with recruiting. They've got a top 10 recruiting class right now. I know they had a flip to Florida, their quarterback commitment. That was a big deal over the weekend, but nobody else has flipped since then. So they're hoping to hang on to this class. And I think eventually he'll get it done. But to me, it's very similar to what Mike Norvell inherited at Florida State in terms of him having to change the complete mindset of that program to being championship quality and instill the type of off-season work that is required to be able to win a championship. They're at the beginning of stages of that. But as we've seen with Florida State, if you get the right guys in, they have the right mentality, it can be done. And I think eventually Miami will get there, but it's a work in progress right now.
I texted Coach Norvell about coming on this morning, Kenny. He didn't answer. So it's just occurred to me. Just saying. You've also you've covered Clemson extensively. When they were here last year for the Cheez-It Bowl, you walked up to Boone High School and interviewed Dabo Swinney. Had a great story on that. What are your thoughts on Clemson? They obviously started the year really hot, kind of came back down to earth a little bit, but how are you feeling about the Tigers and what's next?
It's a great question. Look, before the season started, I thought Clemson would win the ACC, but I did not think they'd make the playoff. I just didn't think they had answers to some of the key questions we had, and those have played out, right? The quarterback has been inconsistent. They still don't have playmakers at receiver. The offensive line is still fairly average, and defensively, I think they've taken a step back, and that's what we've seen play out through the season. Now, I think they're still the favorites to win the ACC, and they still have, I think, according to the ESPN projections, a 31% chance to make the playoff. And I think that's because of who they have left and the fact that they're projected to win the ACC, and there are teams ahead of them that have to play each other. I still have a hard time seeing this as a playoff team right now. But I think, I don't know, they're going to win the ACC, but I see Carolina over here. Carolina's going to give them a big test because of what Drake May brings to the table. I think Drake May should be a Heisman finalist in New York. But the weakness in that defense is the secondary. So if Carolina can get some things going in their passing game with Josh Downs, I think it's going to be a heck of a game. So I'm still on the fence about what's going to happen in the ACC championship game.
Well, we'll wait with bated breath to see what happens next.
Yes.
I know you had a nice long feature on ACC Network yesterday about Jared Verse of Florida State.
Yes.
In the spirit of time, we didn't include any video,
okay.
we'll send the whole thing out. It's like 5 minutes long. Just tell us a little bit about what that story was about and what you learned about Jared while you were doing that piece.
Yeah, well, like I said, I spent a lot of time around Florida State the last few years, and when I saw they got a transfer from the University of Albany, it kind of raised some flags. Albany, what's a kid from Albany doing at Florida State? And then as I started reporting the story, first for ESPN.com in the off season, I learned that the reason the Florida State coaching staff knew about him was because of Albany played Syracuse last year. And instead of watching Syracuse, they ended up watching Jared Verse at Albany because he was the best player on the field. So when he entered the transfer portal, the coaches knew exactly who he was, and Mike Norvell was on the phone with him within 30 minutes to tell him, we're interested, please come on a visit. We'd love to have you. And he ended up getting 30 offers from essentially every prominent school in the country. But he chose Florida State again, not to keep reiterating this about Mike Norvell, because of Mike Norvell, because of the conversations that he's had with them. He had one scholarship offer out of high school, and that was to Albany. He was a tight end, and they transformed him into this defensive end who is one of the best defensive ends in the ACC right now. I think he has a chance to be a ACC Defensive Player of the Year. Folks might remember him from LSU. He was constantly in the backfield. He got hurt midway through the season, but now he's back. He played great against Syracuse last week. And so the feature on ACC Network was just about his journey from essentially 0 FBS scholarship offers to Albany to Florida State. And now Mel Kiper has him rated as one of his top 25 draft prospects.
That's awesome. And I think that kind of speaks to what Kenny was talking about earlier too, and the kind of, the perseverance and the resilience to continue fighting for the thing that you want to be and want to do. I will let you go here shortly, but I do have to ask you about bowl projections. Do you think, I made some offhand comment to Florida State coming to the Cheez-It Bowl. Do you think Florida State's coming to the Cheez-It Bowl?
Well, there's obviously going to be a lot of factors at play. And a lot of it begins with the ACC championship game and what happens there and how does Notre Dame fit into the picture. I think Florida State's probably more likely for the Gator Bowl right now, but I don't know. I really like Carolina, Texas. I saw a few people projecting that one. How great would that be? You got Mac against his old team. I mean, that'd be a pretty exciting matchup.
No, sign us up. That'd be great. That would be great.
But I know people probably want to see Florida State here, right?
No.
Right?
We'd be
Florida
happy
State,
with that too, I
right?
think. They'd both work out okay.
Yeah, they'd both work out. Okay.
We won't tell Colleen. And with that, we'll move on, Matt.